On June 24, 2025, after more than 3 decades on death row, Thomas Lee Gudinas was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. Tonight, we'll take you inside the case that shocked Orlando. A brutal murder that began with a night out and ended with a young woman's life cut tragically short. May 23, 1994. A warm Florida Saturday night in Orlando, where college students and young professionals filled the downtown bars and clubs. At Barbarella's, one of the city's hottest night spots, the music was loud, the drinks were flowing, and nobody could have predicted the horror that was about to unfold. 20-year-old Thomas Gudinas had started the evening like many others, drinking and smoking marijuana with his 3 roommates before heading downtown for a night of bar hopping. By 1 a.m., witnesses remember seeing him at Barbarella's, but when his friends were ready to leave at closing time, Thomas had vanished into the night. Also at the club that evening was Michelle Smith and her fiancé. They'd arrived around 11 p.m., danced, and enjoyed themselves until about 2 a.m., when Michelle decided to call it a night. Her fiancé stayed behind to say goodbye to friends, while she headed out to get the car. That decision may have saved her life. Walking through the dimly lit parking area, Michelle Smith first went to the wrong lot. That's when she noticed him, a man crouched behind a car, watching her. Her instincts kicked in immediately. She quickened her pace, found her car, and locked the doors, but he followed. Looking in her rear-view mirror, Smith saw the same man approaching her vehicle. He tried the passenger door, locked. Then he circled around to the driver's side, also locked. That's when his demeanor changed completely. "Let me in," he shouted, covering his hand with his shirt and repeatedly striking her window. Smith laid on her horn, the sound piercing the quiet night. The noise startled her attacker, and he fled into the shadows. What Michelle Smith didn't know was that her attacker hadn't gone far. He was waiting for his next opportunity. 22-year-old Michelle McGrath was everything you'd expect from a recent college graduate, full of life, newly engaged, with her whole future ahead of her. She'd also been at Barbarella's that night with her fiancé, and like Michelle Smith, she'd left first to retrieve their car. But Michelle McGrath never made it back to the club. Her fiancé waited, then began searching. The parking lot was eerily quiet. Michelle had simply vanished. Walking through the school's courtyard, she noticed a young man sitting on the steps. Average build, short brown hair, wearing baggy dark shorts. When she told him he couldn't be on school property, he didn't respond. Instead, he slowly stood up, adjusted his clothing, and without a word, climbed over the brick wall and disappeared into an alley. Something about his behavior troubled Brand. She followed him into the alley to see what he'd been doing. That's when she found Michelle McGrath's body. The crime scene told a devastating story. The medical examiner determined that McGrath had died from massive head trauma between 3 and 5 a.m. Evidence showed she had fought for her life, but her attacker's violence was overwhelming and deliberate. The breakthrough came when Michelle Smith contacted police. After seeing news reports about the murder, she immediately recognized the connection to her own terrifying encounter hours earlier. When shown a photo lineup, Smith didn't hesitate. She identified Thomas Gudinas as her attacker. Jane Brand, the school employee who discovered McGrath's body, also viewed the lineup. Initially uncertain, she later saw news footage of Gudinas walking and immediately recognized his distinctive posture and gait from that morning at the school. At Gudinas' apartment, his roommates had noticed troubling signs. He hadn't come home with them that night, but by morning he'd returned, covered in blood, his hands scraped and torn, his clothing stained. When questioned about his injuries, Gudinas claimed he'd been in a fight, but what he said next would haunt his roommates forever. According to their testimony, when asked about the murder, Gudinas made shocking admissions about what he'd done to Michelle McGrath. Statements so disturbing, they helped seal his fate in court. Physical evidence supported the witnesses' accounts. Gudinas' DNA was found on the victim, his fingerprints were discovered on a gate near the crime scene and inside McGrath's abandoned car. The forensic evidence painted a clear picture of guilt. During the penalty phase of his trial, Gudinas' defense team painted a picture of a deeply troubled childhood. His mother, Karen, described a difficult pregnancy and birth, followed by months of health problems and behavioral issues. From an early age, Thomas displayed severe behavioral problems, violent tantrums, inability to focus in school, and what teachers described as explosive anger. He was moved through over 100 different placements in the youth services system. His sister testified about their abusive father, describing incidents of physical punishment that crossed into cruelty. By his teens, Thomas was heavily involved with drugs and alcohol. Mental health experts diagnosed him with various. On June 16, 1995, a Florida judge sentenced Thomas Gudinas to death for the first-degree murder of Michelle McGrath. He also received multiple additional sentences for the other charges. For the next 30 years, Gudinas remained on death row while his case went through the lengthy appeals process that characterizes capital punishment cases in America. His lawyers continued to argue that his mental illness made him ineligible for execution, but court after court rejected these appeals. June 24, 2025, Thomas Gudinas woke at 4:45 a.m., knowing it would be his last day alive. His only visitor was his mother. No spiritual advisor, no final prayers. Just the quiet company of the woman who had tried for decades to understand what had gone wrong with her son. For his final meal, Gudinas requested pepperoni pizza, French fries, and a soda. Simple comfort food that seemed almost childlike given the gravity of the moment. At 6 p.m., Gudinas was strapped to the gurney in the execution chamber, wearing a plain white shirt and dark pants. Witnesses described him as appearing calm, with no visible signs of distress. When the curtain was raised, Gudinas scanned the witness room briefly. He was offered the opportunity to make a final statement, but spoke so softly that his words were inaudible to observers. Prison officials believe he may have said a brief prayer. At 6:13 p.m., Thomas Lee Gudinas was pronounced dead. He was 51 years old. Tonight, as we reflect on this case, we remember Michelle McGrath, a young woman whose life was stolen in a moment of senseless violence. Her family has carried this grief for over 3 decades, waiting for justice to finally be served. The case of Thomas Gudinas raises difficult questions about mental illness, childhood trauma, and the death penalty. But for Michelle McGrath's loved ones, today marked the end of a very long wait for justice. In Florida, Gudinas became the 8th person executed since the state resumed capital punishment, and his case serves as a reminder of both the brutality humans are capable of and our justice system's ultimate response to the most heinous crimes.